Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. A Happy New Year to all my lovely followers. I hope you all had a great Hogmanay. I certainly did. Anyway, Outlander is a show about the Fraser clan and their weird adventures with time travel, farming, and melodrama. Episode 10, The Deep Heart's Core, picks up soon after the end of last week, where Brianna is dealing with the mixed emotions of having confessed to her mum that she was raped, is now pregnant, and the man who did it was the same one who robbed her parents months ago. Luckily for her, her dad Jamie's on hand to chat with her, and to let her know that he knows about it, and to give her like a soft shoulder to cry on. Of course, that's until he realises how totally racked with guilt and self-blame that she is, and he starts like victim blaming her, and accused her of maybe enjoying the rape, or maybe she's making up lies about it after the fact, and then she gets so angry she lashes out at him, and then he quickly grabs hold of her, makes it plain to her that in no simple terms could she have ever fought harder. In no way could she have actually stopped it happening, because none of it was her fault at all, and finally she understands. And then she asks about him, and he tells her how he promised not to fight in order to save Claire, and that he'd do the same thing all over again if he had to. And after that, it's like the pair of them understand each other in a new way. And later on that night, it's time for Claire to have a wee chat with Bree about the possibility of her having an abortion. And like, while that's still possible, it could still be dangerous or very painful, because like the only method would actually have to be surgery, and they'd have to do that with anaesthetics. And then they talk about like how the withdrawal method isn't 100% reliable, and how it could actually be Roger's baby. And also they talk about technically, she could still go back to America in the 70s, since it's possible to travel while pregnant, but it's uncertain if a baby could actually survive if it was already born. So Bree has an awful lot to think about. And while she's making her mind up, Ian seems to be getting even keener to get on her good sides, and possibly in her pants as well, because like Jamie points out, cousins getting together is kind of normal in the 18th century. Yeah, so is slavery, Jamie, and blowing smoke up people's bums is medicine, so how about no, yeah? Okay, anyway, it's all good, and Bree's kind of flattered by it. And Jamie points out that like Claire is all sort of chuffed as well, living in the out in the garden in the woods and stuff like that, which gives like Jamie a moment of pause about whether Bree is happy considering all the bad stuff that happened, but as she points out, she came back to find him as well. And that night, though, Bree wakes up to find Roger in her tent, and she tells him all about the baby, and he turns into Stephen Bonnet and starts attacking her, because of course, it's all a nightmare, and she wakes up to find Lizzie, like, standing over her, really worried sick. And her and Lizzie talk, and, like, Lizzie mentions that the man who did it isn't going to bother again, and Bree's, like, curious and suspicious about that, and a few questions later, it comes out exactly what's happened. So at breakfast, Bree rages in, demanding to know what happened to Roger, and Jamie admits that yeah, he did beat up a guy, but he didn't know that it was Roger. And Bree tells him that they had been handfasted and slept together, and Jamie like blows his lid, and just about everything but calls her a slut, and Bree like gives him a big slap. Then she drops the bombshell that it was actually Stephen Bonnet. And Ian like tells him that he actually sold Roger to the Mohawk, and he gets punished as well, and it's pointed out that it's actually a long way to California where the Mohawks come from, so it might be awfully hard to get there and take a long time. So that night, like, they make plans since they reckon they can buy him back or rescuing him, because like, since most likely they're trying to actually adopt him into the tribe, which is something they do. So initially Bree wants to go with them, but like, that she doesn't want Jamie and Ian going alone, and then she decides that actually it's better if Claire goes, because they might need a doctor, so she can't stay alone at the ridge, so they decide that she'll go and visit Jocasta, go with Myrta, because her and Myrta were like pals when they were kids. And then Bree has decided that she also wants to keep the baby, just presumably in case it's Roger's, and maybe dies, or if he gets dead at some point, then it means she actually have something to remember him by. Aw. And then Jamie tells Myrta that when next time he's in Wilmington, he should bring back Bonnet in secret so that he can kill him once and for all. And the next morning, they're all ready to set off, and Ian makes a bit of a wee arse of himself by proposing to Bree, and Jamie tells him to get up, idiot. And then Jamie swears that he won't rest until like he actually finds Roger, and Bree grudgingly accepts this. So then Myrta and Bree head off to like River Run. I don't know where Lizzie is at this point. Maybe she got malaria again, or maybe they ate her on the way. But anyway, Ulysses tries to introduce them and read a letter from Jamie, but Myrta and Bree kind of take turns to spell out everything that's in it. Honestly, you had one job. Meanwhile, all this time, Roger's getting dragged through the countryside now with the guy from the Raven. Yeah. So anyway, he isn't doing very well at all. And that night when the Mohawks are telling fireside stories, they chat, and seems that like Caleb doesn't think that Roger has a lot of chance of getting back home, but he's kind of impressed with his way of keeping track of the days and like the local landmarks, because he's planning to get home again. But the joke's on him, because he dies during the night. Yeah, should have turned into a raven and flown away. But anyway, so it's onwards and down the road, and after a while Roger slips and falls off a ridge, and then he manages to get loose, so he runs and hides under a bush until like all the Mohawks pass by. Then he scoots off up a hill, and then there's a really loud sound, it's like bees, and then it turns out it's not bees, it's a standing stone surrounded by wee cairns. It's probably the same one we saw built on the first episode's prologue, and he goes up, and is he going to touch it? He reaches out his hand, but did he? We'll find out next week. So what did I think? Well, this week was kind of really interesting. It managed to fulfill a lot of plot threads and tied them up in a single episode, as well as establishing a lot of emotional beats and bring things into the light and setting things up for ongoing episodes. I mean, I love the fact that there was a discovery of a new setting stones, one in America, and it's only really a couple of weeks like Gentle Ride from Fraser's Ridge. I mean, that kind of changes things a bit. It opens up like a possibility of more and quicker time travel, and it also means that they could have more adventures. And it means, if Roger did touch that stone, because it looked like he almost might have actually touched it with his finger at the end, he could be about to fly off into the future again. But I mean, to be honest, it could be that they faked us out because they did that before. I mean, remember back in season one where Claire tried to get back to Frank, and then she just got pulled away after a moment of like black screen by a bunch of redcoats. So I mean, let's hope it's not quite the same as that. Because I mean, if next week starts with like a bunch of like the Mohawks pulling him away, I'll be a little bit disappointed. But as for the main stuff, I mean, wow. I mean, there was so much character work going on here. I mean, not only did we have that awesome like opening scene with Jamie and Bree, with them both kind of opening up to each other, but that amazing big like kitchen table scene where like Bree takes everyone to task about the Roger thing and things just keep escalating round and round. And like the bit where she tells Jamie that he's a savage and starts comparing him to Frank right to his face. I mean, ouch. I mean, meanwhile, it was also really nice to see some normal human interactions, like the bit where Jamie and Bree are sitting talking about like peanut butter jelly sandwiches and stuff and other foods that they missed. I mean, I just thought that was quite nice. It was nice to actually have a scene that felt human and normal between them. I mean, it was a little bit contrived in the sense of, it was a bit of a let's give them nice things to talk about for a change, something that's not actually plot related. But it felt kind of like, what's this actually doing? What is it adding to the plot? Nothing much. I mean, it makes sense, it's realistic, but sometimes it feels like, out of place. Also, I like the fact that they addressed the fact that Jamie and Ian are people from the 18th century, and that came up more than once during this episode. And I love the fact that Claire's a 20th century woman and Jamie's an 18th century man, and sometimes it actually comes up. But I mean, to be honest, the last season or two, there's been a little bit too much of the, Jamie just automatically sort of defaulting to kind of a modern day mindset, and I think that's not entirely accurate because he seemed to just like accept or preempt like whatever it was that somebody from nowadays would think. And he's from 200 years in the past, so it doesn't always make sense when that happens. So I like the fact that this week, they had all this stuff about marriage and sex, and it all made sense. I mean, things like the stuff with like Ian fancying Bree, and wanting to propose to her, that made sense because, similar to like Jamie expecting that she'd want to be married off because she's in the family way. I mean, that's how people of those days thought because that was how society and their sort of culture kind of worked. I mean, more than it shows, it shows that he's got a bit of an ugly side to him. I mean, that whole thing when he was angry about the Roger thing, and it made it clear that
And he left, and that was...
You bedded him from lust. You said he raped you of your virtue. I nearly killed the man. To think I was defending your honour.
Actually, I mean, he did have the situation backwards because he seemed to initially think, oh, right, okay, it was obviously Roger that had actually raped her because that, after she said it was Roger. So he still felt in the right. And that kind of shows that he's a bit of an old-timey person as well as a bit of a stuffy dad overprotective of his daughter and scandalised that she might sleep with a man outside of marriage. And that was interesting because that points back to like Jamie's stinking papist upbringing.
I'm a stinking papist now.
Shut up, Willie. And anyway, but some of that brings me to the stuff that I wasn't quite as happy about this week. You see, the Jamie stuff made sense, but it also hammered home to me how much coincidence and contrivance there was needed to get to this point. I mean, I mentioned some of that the other week, but more than that, the fact that, he has this weird old-timey mindset kind of stood at odds with some of the stuff that happened. I mean, like the bit where he tried all the reverse psychology on Bree at the start, where he basically victim blames her until she tries to hit him. I mean, that could have totally backfired. I mean, what if she just run away crying? I mean, he'd have basically ruined his relationship with her forever. I mean, granted, he already had because he'd beaten up Roger, but we didn't know that at the time. But then at the same time, this is like back in season one when like Claire decides to like basically scream and shout and yell at Jamie until he finally, breaks through and admits what happened to him and the fact that he branded himself at the end of season one. And that at the time, I mean, that's not how psychology works. That's really unhealthy. I mean, it could be that, that makes sense from the point of view of he's from the 18th century, she's from 1945. But I mean, this doesn't seem like a sensible way of things going about it because this whole kind of thing felt really kind of modern in a strange way. I mean, specifically, some of the things he said, they sounded awfully written. They sounded awfully like, I felt a bit like I was reading something that was like an article from The Guardian or something. I mean, it clashed in my head a wee bit, especially when we got his whole bit about later on when he was like, talking about her sleeping with Roger from lust. Now maybe it's me, but it felt like this was a different character, or at least it felt like the writers were different between these scenes. I mean, it could have just been me, but I definitely felt like there was a difference in the way that he was talking and the way the words coming out of his, like the cadences and type of rhythm of speech and things that were coming through felt like they were different, like they'd come from a different hand. But mainly, most of my problems this week were kind of technical things. I mean, things like, Ian Bell's still doing that over enunciating thing he does sometimes. Like, it's not, he's not speaking in a way that Scottish people tend to speak. It's kind of a way that people who are from a bad drama school speak, where, again, they over enunciate every single word in a way that's very unrealistic. And, it's strange because Jamie doesn't do that, and nobody else on the show does that. But Ian's doing it like quite often, and he did it all the time through this episode. And still Lizzie, I mean, she's a character that only seems present when it suits the story and then mysteriously disappears the rest of the time. I mean, what about that Caleb guy, the Raven guy from, who was literally on the show just so Roger could talk about tying knots in a rope and keeping track of landmarks, and then he died? I mean, it seemed kind of pointless. I mean, maybe there was more scenes with him and they all got cut out, and if they did, then that's a shame because, to be honest, if that character had a point to him, I'd rather have maybe seen that than maybe, Claire and Bree talking about peanut butter jelly sandwiches and Led Zeppelin. And another thing, as a non-book reader, I was kind of hoping for more this week, more just events. Sure, now there was something very theatrical and kind of JB Priestley about the way that it all came out in that one big table scene, in the kitchen. But literally that means that this episode was a kitchen sink drama with like Roger bit walking about in a bit in the background. And until he actually headed off, and until like at the end and got away from the Mohawks, and until they all headed off to actually find him, nothing much had really been advanced in the plot other than like tying up labyrinth of threads and people finding out secrets. And I'm not saying it was bad, because it's not a bad episode. It was good. It was interesting. But I kind of hoped there would have been a bit more plot advancement, because we've only got a couple of episodes to go, and much of this is just stuff that, as an audience, we already knew. We've just been waiting to come out. And while things have been set up for the last three episodes to be interesting, I literally have no idea where the story's going now. I honestly just don't. And I'm also very surprised by the idea that Bree really wants to continue having the baby. Maybe that's just me, but it seems a bit sort of like silly at this point. I know that they've gone to great pains to like talk about the fact that it's difficult, and it would be difficult for her to have an abortion back in those days, especially with like the lack of medical care and stuff. But it also seems like the fact that it might be Rogers seems like such a vanishingly small possibility that I just don't entirely buy it. But anyway, as I said, it was a decent episode. It maybe just wasn't all I'd hoped for. But still, till next week, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions.